I'm standing here today because, like perhaps many of you, there is a question about open dialogue that has been with me for a long time. What if? What if we had open dialogue? I would like to share a little of my what if with you. If we had open dialogue, maybe I would live in this beautiful old castle with a moat around it. And I wouldn't look like this. I would look like that. I had my first experience, which qualified for the label psychotic episode, at this place in northern Germany. After regular visits to the monastery, it was time for a trial period. This meant 6 weeks of sharing the nitty-gritty of everyday life together, in order to examine the decision to enter this monastic community for a lifetime. The Catholic religious world calls it vocation. It didn't need the critical mind of the PR consultant from the big city of Hamburg, which had been my professional self up to that point. It needed a listening heart, being called and listening. I got into a deep inner process. My whole life so far was being refocused toward this place. My experience was fully integrated into the stories and narratives of Christian spirituality and mysticism. It was in this context that I finally found reconciliation for an old family trauma. The voice of the Mother General resounded in my heart and said she had been waiting for me for a long time. And the Holy Mary, whom I had rejected since childhood, had sitting on the edge of my bed in a sisterly way in order to support me. Looking on from the outside, I didn't sleep anymore. I couldn't quite keep to the daily routine. I must have expressed myself strangely in some places. People were worried. A visit to the GP followed, and the next day I was admitted to the psychiatric clinic in the neighboring city. This is when it happened. Overnight, this promising aspirant had turned into a potentially mentally ill person, who was only seeking refuge in the monastery from the evil world outside, and thus clearly could not have a true vocation. My whole experience was reinterpreted, classified, and seen with the new terms of the diagnostic system. The sisters were left alone with this experience in their convent, and I was alone with it, staying in a strange place. What if? What if we, the nuns and I, had received support on our own ground, literally within our own four walls of the castle, and contextually within our respective spiritual framework of interpretation? What if together we had understood what I had experienced, what the mystical tradition has to say about it, what other sisters had experienced when they had arrived at this holy place? What if I had been able to tell them about the struggles in my family? What if the psychiatric explanation had only been one among other points of view? In that way, a good explanation if it was of benefit but possible to lay aside if not helpful. What would have been emerged from an open dialogue? But we are not here today to talk about the what if. We are here to talk about the what when. What happens when people get open dialogue? Many years have passed, and open dialogue has moved out of the Nordic countries and Western Lapland into the world. People in America, Australia, Italy, Poland, Switzerland, Germany, England, and even Japan are trained to offer open dialogue. Funding bodies and health ministers will have to be convinced. In order to convince them, there is a need for more research. For little people like us, watching Daniel Mackler's film and reading Robert Whittaker's books, hearing people talk about their experience with open dialogue was enough. It was enough to implant the deep what-if question into us. However, funders want facts of effectiveness and cost efficiency. That is why we are doing our best to deliver these facts to them. That is why we are here today, but what is it that we should investigate? The Swiss psychologist, psychoanalyst, and author Arno Gruen writes in his book, The Madness of Normality, schizophrenia is a struggle for integration, which fails because it lacks the strength to live its own truth in a hostile environment. To be honest, I admire this so-called schizophrenic. He lives his truth, no matter what, so far that he would rather break with the shared reality than denying this truth. So what is that we measure when we measure relapse rate, ability to work, social integration, as is usual and asked for? Do we really grasp the cause of the dilemma and whether the process of integration is possible? Or do we even end up measuring the imposed adaptation to a society which remains in itself addicted to its own madness? Does the truth of the schizophrenic become livable, or must it become silent and subordinate, no matter at which price? Which questioner will record this? Whom will I really tell what? Does the researcher have the right kind of language and the right kind of ear? Is he able to connect, understand, even provide language where I have none, without imposing something to me? For the sake of science in general, we know what to do. Randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies with an active placebo. Yeah, let's do that. Excuse me, this may work if we start from a natural science view of things, which speaks of brain metabolism and its disorders, of an ambiguous diagnosis and diseases. This may work when drugs are tested for their efficacy, but this is about people, their experience, their stories. It's about recovery. But what are the basics of recovery and of open dialogue? Informed consent, shared decision-making, freedom of choices. Does that work by random, without providing any reason? Wait, stop. Randomness is the reason. Only in this way we know independently and objectively what works better or worse. By summarizing people and their stories in large clusters, not giving them a choice, treating everyone the same with one method or the other, and assigning them based on the principle of randomness, without anyone knowing what he or she is getting. An independent researcher draws lots and thus serves the great scientific community in the best possible way, with randomness. Randomness is our best friend. I have understood that randomization is the gold standard of today's psychiatric research. I have understood that for the critics, this is a sticking point in the research of open dialogue in Tornio. I understand that this is what it takes to convince funding bodies and health directors. That's what the Odyssey is all about, and that's good. In the short run, at least it's good, so that we get to the what-when as quickly as possible. But we know, in depth, on our hearts, that we are dealing with people and stories, and we know about the limits of this way of research. So let us do what is necessary in the short run, but never lose sight of the fact that in the long run we cannot let randomness rule us. We do need other ways. We must change the paradigm instead of submitting to it. When I told my boss in Interlaken that I had been asked to join the advisory board for Open Dialogue project and that perhaps we could be one of the research sites, he said without a second of consideration, no. Research does not serve the people we want to support. That made me think, what had supported me? All I learned from traditional quantitative research results was that 1/3 only experienced the one psychotic episode, 1/3 recurring, and 1/3 would not recover at all. This was my hope after my first breakdown, and my increasing despair after the second, third, fourth, fifth. I don't know about you, but on my way I've learned most from stories and people, more than from numbers. Maybe a rose is a rose, is a rose, is a rose, but a schizophrenic is not a schizophrenic, is not a schizophrenic. Peter's great inner connection with the Hells Angels, while at home in other worlds, is different from Suzanne's alien, which she knows within herself, is different from St. Mary on my bed edge. A family member is not like the other, and the professional does not resemble the other. We are different. And even if traditional quantitative data helps to be able to speak with one united, stronger voice, we need qualitative data too. I believe that research on open dialogue must be the way open dialogue is, open and dialogical, polyphonic, embracing the plurality and diversity of voices, ensuring that every voice can be heard. When we engage in dialogue, we live on stories, not on their translations into number on a scale. It is good to know that 75% of the open dialogue clients have returned to work in Tornio. But for me, as I am personally involved in this subject, there are 1,000 questions behind it. What work? Fulfilling work? Were people able to contribute their stories with crisis experiences? Were they supported? We all have and continue to extend our lived experience through open dialogue. People at the center of concern, family members, practitioners. There are so many things I would like to know about them. The GP, the general practitioner, who is sitting in a network meeting for the first time, how does he manage to endure uncertainty? And family members and friends, what happens when their voices are really heard? What impact does it have on the specific situation, but also on their commitment and their desire to tell others about it? What does their empowerment through open dialogue look like? I want someone to ask this question. But I would also want to ask questions myself, hear the answers, be allowed to draw a conclusion from them. Exploring dialogue in a dialogical way means involving everyone in the process of gaining, analyzing, and interpreting knowledge. The stories from which I have learned were found on the internet, in books, on the radio, or in individual encounters. I still don't know enough about what is meant by qualitative, participative, user-led research or med studies to really be able to judge how it is possible to save stories in a scientific way. But I'm convinced it is possible. It has taken me over 10 years of shame and hiding until I reached these healing and identity-forming encounters. I mean, I wanted to become a nun. I wanted nothing to do with mentally ill people, because if I was mentally ill, I couldn't become a nun. In the end, however, this label, no matter what position is on it, opened up a whole new world for me, a type of work that fulfills me. Friendship around the globe, meaning and purpose, finally a process of integration that became livable, encouraging for me and others. So to end this talk, I would like to share a song with you that has become something of a peer work anthem for me. Maybe it could become your open dialogue anthem too. Probably she would have sung this song, but I cannot, I'm sorry, but I will read the text. It speaks of the vocation of the prophet Isaiah. The song begins like this. I, the Lord of sea and sky, I have heard, sorry, I cannot continue. I have heard my people cry. All who dwell in dark and sin, my hand will save. I who made the stars and night, I will make the darkness bright. Who will bear my light to them? Whom shall I send? And we can then hear Isaiah answer in the chorus. Sisters. Here I am, Lord. Is it I, Lord? I have heard you calling in the night. I will go, Lord. If you lead me, I will hold your people in my heart. Yes, it's a scream from the dark. And yes, I have found my people among those who were hit hard, the comrades and companions, on the way of navigating crisis and finding meaning within it. And really, I believe not only Israel, also they are God's chosen people. And I will hold them in my heart. Thank you.